Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I will be targeting trout from the bank of Lake Camanche at the South Shore side. Spring is finally here and there are a lot of runoffs and a lot of great fishing opportunities that will be coming up in a few weeks here. So for today's episode, because I've noticed that the South Shore is the most requested and searched topic, I will demonstrate my take on how to fish for these trout in spring from the bank. My strategy when targeting trout in the spring from the bank, especially at these reservoirs that get planted, is to target them with Powerbait. However, the biggest difference in the spring is I will use a casting bubble instead of an egg sinker. The reason I'm using a casting bubble is because as we get more sunlight, the vegetation will start to grow along the bottom of the reservoir, so using an egg sinker is not conducive. I like to use a chartreuse garlic style Powerbait because this time of year, the water could be rather stained from all the runoffs that are entering the lake. The amount of Powerbait I'm using is very little. I just want enough to cover my size 10 salmon snell hook. You don't need a whole lot of Powerbait. These fishes are naturally inclined to come into these large flats in the back where there is a runoff channel. The area I'm targeting is a massive flat, so therefore I will use the water bubble in substitute of the egg sinker, and I will fill the bubble completely with water in order for the bait to rest nicely on top of the newly fresh vegetation. I will be fishing with both a spinning rod setup, armed with 4-pound test, but a much longer rod, 8 foot to be preferable, because I know that this time of year I will need to make a long cast, because as the water temperature begins to warm, these trout will move into these massive shallow flat back bays, and a long cast might be needed depending on the days. However, these fishes can still be caught relatively up close, but for the sake of today, in the event that these fishes might be found out further in these shallow back bays, a long cast might be needed. Hence, therefore, why I prefer to fish with an 8-foot rod in the event that I need to make a long cast into the shallow back bay. The reason these fishes are going into these back bays is because as the lake rises, there will be small runoffs that will attract these fishes into these back bays. This is the area the bank angler should be fishing and trying to target. After casting both rods out, the rod on the left began getting bit. I know that these fishes are going to be out a little further than usual today because on this particular lake, the South Shore side often warms up a lot much faster than the North Shore side. I ended up picking the rod as soon as the rod loaded and I got myself a nice little trout. This time of year, an angler can catch all kinds of trout, whether or not it was planted in the fall or a freshly planted trout. The lake is full of fishes. Especially with the golden mussel closure, these fishes had received little to no fishing pressure in the main lake. However, for those anglers that don't like to fish the main lake, there is a pond on this side of the lake. But the most requested and searched topic I've seen so far around my area had been how to fish the main lake. So therefore, on this short evening afternoon, I've decided to target the main lake instead of the pond. So one of the key factors that I took into consideration today is the leader length. Particularly when I'm fishing this side of the reservoir, I want a very long leader, 3 feet or more, 3.5 depending on the vegetation. This time of year, in mid-February, there will be a small amount of algae on the bottom of the lake. But depending on how much sunlight we get, the algae could be very severe, so a long leader will be in your favor. This is a small but very nice planted trout. Whenever I'm fishing Powerbait, I will fish for keep. So onto the stringer he goes, and he'll make some nice great fillet for the grill later on. Spring is here despite the water temperatures being still relatively cold. These fishes know that with the longer daylight hours, the water is warming day by day. Another good thing I like to do is also bring a chair, especially when doing this kind of fishing, even for a few hours. I like to stay comfortable. The rod on the right hand side ended up getting bit. This is a very soft bite, and I knew that after I caught this second fish that most of these fishes were out pretty far in the shallow back bay. This is why it is very important to fish with a much longer rod in the event during this time of year that an angler needs to make a much further cast. I ended up getting bit and waited until the rod loaded, then I picked it up and I got another nice trout. Another key mistake I see a lot of anglers make this time of year is they'll often go to the deepest area of the lake and try to cast as far as they can into the deep water. This time of year is not the time to do that. Most of the fishes will be found relatively shallow, so therefore an angler should focus their effort on shallow water. Most trout, in my experience, especially out here in Northern California during the early spring, will be found mixed with the black basses in the shallow back bays. So therefore, at this particular lake, the South Shore side, I am going to focus my effort on the long back bays, shallow particularly, where most black bass will do their spawning. This area I'm targeting has a small flowing inlet to my left hand side, but depending on how high the lake is or how fast the inlet is flowing, I will target closer or further away from the inlet. This is a small holdover trout. Judging from how his fins has grown back, he's probably been in the reservoir for quite a while. I will put him on the stringer and I will make another cast back out to the area where I seem to be getting bit. This is why having a longer rod is so important this time of year, especially when targeting these long shallow back bays. You never know where these fishes might be located. So starting my strategy earlier in the day, I will put one rod close, and now as I've gotten my second bite out far, I will now target both rods out to where I've been getting bit. Some anglers might be wondering why these trout are found here in these shallow back bays during this time of year. Well, in my opinion, these shallow back bays, especially with all this spring runoff water, provide a lot of food that is brought in naturally from the bank. And these fishes are naturally just attracted to the running water, hence why they're here in these shallow back bays with runoff. The rod on the right ended up getting bit, and all I did was waited for the fish to load up on the power bait. When the rod loads up, then all I do is pick up the rod and start reeling. This is another very nice rainbow trout. So hopefully today's episode explained my take on how to target the South Shore of this particular reservoir. The reason I don't like to target the South Shore side of this reservoir is because the North Shore side is a lot closer to me than the South Shore side is. However, I am catching the same fishes from either side of the reservoir, so therefore making the extra long drive for me just isn't worth the effort. But the target species is the same and the tactic is the same. Whether I'm on the North Shore or the South Shore, I am looking for the same features. So hopefully this clarifies why I don't have much South Shore of Lake Camanche content. This is a very nice rainbow trout, probably a fresh planter because I can see his round tail. I welcome all fishes though, because I am trying to catch a limit despite only having a few hours to fish this afternoon and evening. So therefore, if I land this fish, I will also take him and put him on the stringer. He is such a hard fighter, especially this time of year as the water warms up a bit. These trout fight best when the water temperatures are anywhere between 55 degrees to 60 degrees. Not a bad fish, a typical Mount Lassen planter that gets planted in these reservoirs. He is healthy nonetheless, and I will put him on the stringer and I'll get some nice fillets out of these fishes. Hopefully I catch a limit before the sun sets, but if I don't, I'm okay with a handful of fishes. The rod on the left hand side ended up getting bit, but this fish ended up swimming towards me. This is why I like to watch the line, just in case if the fish do swim towards me. So hopefully today's episode demonstrates that an angler can target these fishes quite successfully from the bank despite having a boat closure. The rod ended up loading up and all I did was pick up the rod and give it a quick little set just in case a slack had developed in the line. I ended up getting it into another very nice planter trout, but unfortunately the sun is setting soon and I gotta go clean these fishes before heading off home for the day. So I will take my fishes for the day even though I didn't catch a limit. It was just a great time to be out on the water. Spring is finally here and I don't have to lug around all that heavy winter gear that I typically would carry to stay warm on the bank. So whether you're fishing on the north end of the lake or the south end of the lake, the concept is the same. If you are bank bound, these shallow back bays are your best chances as a bank angler to target these trout quite successfully. Bait is my preferred option, But for the anglers who prefer a much more interactive style of fishing, I highly recommend an angler try spinners and rapalas this time of year. With the stained water, these fishes aren't feeding visually, so therefore an angler should make as much noise as possible to attract the fishes based on their lateral line. Some anglers might opt for stuff like micro jigs, but in my opinion, when fishing micro jigs, it is extremely slow paced, and it is as slow paced as bait fishing. So why do the micro jigs when I could just set out power bait for the fishes and catch the same kind of fish an angler will be trying to catch with micro jigs? That's just my personal opinion on the take to why I don't really micro jig this time of year. I will land this fish and call it quits for the day. I will show him to you guys real quick. He is a very healthy and bright fish nonetheless. Probably been in here earlier in the season because he is starting to show signs that he's growing back his fins. I'll put him on the stringer and pack it up and call it quits for the day, and I'll take them to the cleaning station. Overall, it was just a great day out on the water. I caught a handful of fishes, even though I didn't catch my limit. It was just a great day to be out on the water. Spring is finally here, and I don't have to lug around all that heavy winter gear that I typically would have to fish with. I ended the evening with some very nice bright orange trout fillet. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, tight lines y'all.